All right. Well, welcome to another mock draft. What we're going to do here is we're going to do if every team drafted best player available. There's always a lot of talk about, like, should you draft best player available or should you more so draft for need, all that stuff. Well, I thought it would be kind of a fun test. I've done this a couple times. What if just everyone, like in years past, what if we looked at team needs and threw them out the window and simply just said, okay, going down to consensus big board, drafting best player available. Some of these are, I think usually when I do these, it actually makes a lot more sense than you would have expected. But yeah, let's get into it. Caleb Williams is number one. Just to be clear, I'm going to use the consensus big board, not the PFF data that you see on the screen. So, for example, number two is Drake May to the Commanders, which seems like it'll happen. And number three is actually Marvin Harrison. So, the Patriots, I wouldn't hate that necessarily. Here's where things get a little funky, as Jaden Daniels is going to go at number four to the Cardinals. Now, obviously, I think quarterbacks is kind of the one position I would say drafting simply due to, I would typically say you almost always want to draft best player available. Quarterback is kind of the obvious exception to that, but for the Cardinals, it could maybe make sense to try and trade down a pick or two if Daniels is available at four, and Daniels could still go at four, just not to them. That might make some sense. Chargers, Malik Neighbors, that would certainly help them out a lot. And then, Rome Odunze to the Giants is also one that I think would, I very much could see that happening. Number seven, this is interesting, and something that hasn't been mocked at all, but I don't think it's out of the question, I guess. What about J.J. McCarthy to the Titans, who is, that would be the best player available according to consensus big board. And I think a lot of people feel like Will Levis did enough to, have another year. But, okay, well, what if he sucks the first month of the season? Now you have J.J. McCarthy. You need a quarterback. It's not the dumbest idea in the world, although I doubt it'll happen. Number eight is something I think actually probably will happen. Dallas Turner probably going to end up in Atlanta Falcon. I could easily see that happening. And then Joe Alt to the Bears. Sure, why not? Again, not listed as one of their needs, but, getting a franchise tackle is usually helpful. Then we have Brock Bowers to the Jets. I definitely could see that helping them out. And then we'll follow it up with the Vikings, who would end up with Terrion Arnold, a corner. So I'm sure Vikings fans would rather maybe a quarterback here, or maybe not. I don't know. But, again, definitely something that could work, right? Again, so far, most of these make sense and could work. And even, the Broncos, corner isn't the biggest position of need, but getting Quinyon Mitchell would help them out. And it's kind of one of those things where if you don't love the quarterbacks, which the consensus big board does not, maybe not the worst idea in the world. Moving on to number 13, Jared Verse, or Verse, still not sure exactly how you say his name, but he would go to the Raiders. That would totally work. Get a guy out opposite Max Crosby. Don't hate that. I know they just drafted, a guy, not Trayvon Walker, blanking on his name, the, guy that drafted 7th overall. I believe that was last year, but not sure how impressed you were with his rookie year. So, getting another edge rusher wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Worst case scenario, you have 3 edge rushers. Teams play more than 2 edge rushers, right? It's not like, sure, maybe you don't play more than 2 at a time, but you're going to have, your third edge rusher gets over 500 snaps. So there's a lot of value there. The Saints would then get a tackle, which they could use. So this kind of works out when best player available is also one of the biggest positions of need. So the Colts are interesting. So they're going to end up with Talise Fuaga, offensive lineman, which they definitely don't need. But I don't know. I guess they could, would Will Fries be kind of the backup guy? Really what would happen here is, well, now you have a plan B, right? Because, you have Bernard Rainman and Braden Smith at the tackle position. Someone's going to get hurt. At some point, someone's going to either retire or, sign a new contract. So you're still getting a good player this way. Although in this scenario, I would consider maybe going to next highest on the board, Laiu Latu, and getting him instead. But because of this exercise, the Seahawks are going to get him. So Seahawks fans, I would be happy about that if I were you. The Jaguars get Brian Thomas, who I actually gave him in a different mock draft, and I think it was the chaotic mock draft. So not exactly something I would, expect, but there's some value there. And hey, the Bengals end up with, Brian Murphy II, which is definitely a position to need and the next best player. So usually works out. The Rams could use an offensive lineman, and they're getting one with Choi Fuantu. and then you have the Steelers, who end up with a corner here. They're getting Cooper DeJean. So again, kind of needs and best player available kind of matches up in a lot of ways. And there's been very few so far outside of the quarterback situations where you look at and say, that's just wrong. That's just not what should happen. So kind of interesting there. 21, J.C. Latham. So again, the Dolphins could use a tackle. Here you go. The Eagles could use a corner, and next up on their list is Nate Wiggins. So they feel pretty good about how that's going. Then you have the Vikings, who, worth mentioning, earlier drafted a corner. They're now going to get a offensive lineman, Armarius Mims. So again, without a quarterback, that's kind of the issue, right? They're getting two good players, but they still kind of could have addressed the quarterback and now cannot due to this. Kool-Aid McKinstry should work out well for the Cowboys. I wouldn't hate that pick. And then you have, it's kind of crazy how well this fits on some of these. Newton going to the Packers here. So that's definitely a good one. This one's interesting. So Tampa Bay, who has a decent amount of needs, ends up with Adonai Mitchell at 26. He is 26th on the consensus big board. Very much not a need whatsoever. But at the same time, if you like him, getting a third receiver here would not be the worst thing in the world either. If you're good at something, why not be great at it? That could work. So Graham Barton going at 27 to the Cardinals, which is, again, not a bad one whatsoever. They end up with Daniels, which isn't ideal, but then they get a good center for their if they're running a two quarterback system, I guess. They need two quarterbacks that can play. I don't know. The Bills end up with Jackson Powers Johnson, which definitely is not the move. Oh, he's at the top of the board. Definitely not the move that they probably would go out and make happen, right? I think that there's a lot of big needs that they have. They're trying to compete right now. But again, it's like drafting for need. This is why drafting for need is kind of weird. It's like, is Will Clapp their projected center? Is he a guy that's so good that you can't draft the best center available? No, he's a fine you can find players like that at other positions if they're positions of weakness. I wouldn't view the draft that way personally. 29 is one that I actually have done in other mock drafts too. It's kind of crazy how this works out. Chop Robinson goes to the Lions. I feel that's something that I've been projecting a lot, so it's kind of funny how that worked out. Tyler Guyton, who is going to go at number 30 to the Baltimore Ravens, who even their projection is most often they've seen Ravens have selected him typically in most mock drafts, which is interesting. 31, another, this would never happen in a million years, but again, it is a little interesting. What about Michael Penix at 31, which seems crazy, but I guess what I would say a little bit is, hey, if Purdy gets hurt, which has happened to him before, you have a plan B. It's not the worst thing in the world. And then Bo Nix to the Chiefs here at 32 also would not happen. So, and wouldn't really make sense. They don't need a backup quarterback, I don't think. I don't know if that's, their team is so dependent on Mahomes. So what have we learned here? What was the point of this exercise? Well, I think the main thing you look at is there's only really one or two picks you look at that weren't related to quarterbacks that you're like, that was a terrible job. Like, that would be a disaster. And even those, I don't know if you'd say is a disaster. Like the Colts, I don't think they would want Fuaga, but you could make it work. It wouldn't be as exciting as like a Laiulatu. But there's only a couple that you really are underwhelmed by outside of the quarterbacks. So to me, it goes back to my philosophy of, you usually want to draft for need, unless there are some exceptions that you would pay attention to, but you usually want to draft for need, and except for the quarterback, that kind of changes everything. So yeah, that's how I view it. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from y'all, and of course, as always, thanks for watching.